This is Standing Watch. And now, Evangelist Norbert Link.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to our Standing Watch program. Interesting, alarming developments are taking place in the Catholic Church, past, present, possibly, or certainly future. But you might say, well, that doesn't affect me, so why should I listen to this? I'm not a Catholic. Well, let's make sure you understand correctly, because it does affect all of us. The Associated Press wrote on September 27, Belgium's Prime Minister blasted Pope Francis for the Catholic Church's horrific legacy of clerical sex abuse and cover-ups here in Belgium, demanding concrete steps to come clean with the past and put victims' interests ahead of those in the institution, in a blistering welcome at the start of Francis' visit on Friday. The speech by Prime Minister Alexander De Croo was one of the most pointed ever, directed at the Pope during a foreign trip, where diplomatic protocol usually keeps outrage out of the public remarks. But even King Philippe had strong words for Francis, demanding the Church work incessantly to atone for the crimes and help victims heal. Their tone underscored just how raw the abuse scandal still is in Belgium. Let me just say, not only in Belgium, where 2 decades of revelations of abuse and systematic cover-ups have devastated the hierarchy's credibility and contributed to an overall decline in Catholicism and the influence of the once powerful Catholic Church. Now, let me just say that the Catholic Church will become extremely powerful again, perhaps under a new pope, not the present one. The article continues. The Prime Minister, King and Pope also refer to a new church-related scandal rocking Belgium over so-called forced adoptions. After World War II and through the 1980s, many single mothers were forced by the Belgian Catholic Church into offering their newborns up for adoption. That happened in Ireland too, by the way, perhaps in other countries as well. Often they barely saw their babies before nuns took them away, and the babies were then placed for adoption, with money changing hands. For those adopted, it is close to impossible now to find out who their birth mothers were, since the records have long ago disappeared. Francis said he was, quote-unquote, saddened to learn of these practices, but said such criminality was, quote, mixed in with what was unfortunately the prevailing view in all parts of society at this time. Many believed in conscience that they were doing something good for both the child and the mother, he said, referring to the social stigma of an unwed mother in a Catholic country. It is estimated that it affected about up to 30,000 babies. Now let me just say this. No attempt to justify these horrific crimes can be something which God would accept. In the Old Testament, everyone who would kidnap or rob a person would be punished by death. Everyone in whose possession a robbed child would be found would be punished by death. You can look at this in Exodus chapter 21, verse 16. Now here we have a situation where in all likelihood the babies were taken away from the mothers against their will by the nuns. Money was paid, I'm not sure to the mothers, probably to the church. That's a scandal of tremendous proportions. And for the Pope to say, oh, I'm saddened, but we have to understand the times, is just a scandal all by itself. But it goes on, it goes further. That's not the end of it yet, because FSS-PX News wrote on September 30, but before I go on, let me just say, these are the scandals we are aware of. This is probably the tip of the iceberg. I mean, you can only imagine what's happening beneath the surface. Terrible, terrible situations. And the Bible tells you it's going to get worse and worse and worse. Now, when it comes to the article I just mentioned, it says, here's a new list of capital sins, as the Synod document describes them, and the Synod is just meeting right now to talk about what? Catholicism? Here are new sins. Sin against peace. Sin against creation, against indigenous populations, against migrants. Sin of abuse. Sin against women, family, youth. Sin of using doctrine as stones to be hurled. Sin against poverty. And sin against synodality, which they define as lack of listening, communion, and participation of all. Now, this comes from the word synod, which is Greek and means assembly or meeting. So these are 7 capital sins. The article goes on to say, some of them are too general and can cover many situations. The sin against poverty can be a lack of assistance to the poor or even wastefulness. The sin against the family can cover divorce, contraception, abortion, surrogacy. It is curious that there is a sin against youth, but no sin against old age. Euthanasia is already rife in many countries and seeks to spread to every continent. As for the sin of abuse, it's a vast spectrum. Abuse through physical violence, sexual violence, abuse of power, abuse of corporate assets. It should be noted that these sins reflect the preoccupations of a pope who has a personal conception of certain issues and who often comes to forget the essentials because of his bias. As for the sin against migrants, it has taken on an increasingly sharp tone recently, to the point of asserting that turning away migrants is a grave sin. I talked about this recently in another Standing Watch program. It goes on to say this would only be conceivable in cases of grave danger to the migrant's life, but then it would also be conceivable in cases of grave danger to anybody's life. But then it concludes by saying, the one that appears most strikingly strange is the last one, sin against synodality, or lack of listening, communion, and participation of all. Should we see this as an accusation against bishops and possibly priests who defend episcopal power and refuse to see it diluted in the common priesthood, quote-unquote, of the faithful? Should we see it as a landmine prepared for participants in the synodal assembly who wish to reject what is being cunningly prepared in the synod? Should we anticipate a forthcoming sin against democracy in the Church, which would be nothing more than a negation of the hierarchical structure that Christ built for the supernatural society he founded? These are interesting questions. You know, when you look at this list of capital sins, which the Catholic Church is coming up with now, not one of which can be found in God's law, the 10 Commandments. You see, God says sin is a transgression of the law, 1 John 3, verse 4. And what law are we talking about? It's the law of the 10 Commandments, as Jesus Christ makes very clear, as James makes very clear, as many other authors of the New Testament make very clear. It's the 10 Commandments. But you see, the idea is like, the 10 Commandments have been done away with by Christ and have been replaced by a so-called moral law. Nobody knows what that is. No, that is not true. The wages of sin is death. You transgress against the 10 Commandments, you're worthy of death. You know, we have prepared a free booklet, the 10 Commandments, because many people either believe the 10 Commandments are no longer valid, or they have no clue and no idea as to what the 10 Commandments actually tell you to do and not to do. It's very important you understand this. And so this booklet, well, I say booklet, it's almost a book. I mean, it's 180 pages thick. It's free for the asking. You can get a free copy. I would encourage you to ask for one. Because ultimately, this is the question you should ask yourself. Am I willing to sin against God by breaking His law, or am I willing to sin against traditions by a church, the Catholic Church, which has come up with these kind of things not found in the Bible at all, and which have no consequence for you when it comes to the way God looks at you? So you need to know what God requests of you, what the Ten Commandments tell you, because let me just say, not one of which is really being kept in the Catholic Church. I hope it's being different when it comes to you. I hope that you are willing to keep the 10 Commandments, because really it's ultimately a question between life and death for you. Thank you very much for listening. This is Norbert Link for the Standing Watch program.
Standing Watch is a presentation by The Church of the Eternal God, P.O. Box 270519, San Diego, California 92198. More information is also available at our website, eternalgod.org.